everyone. How many times do you have to tell your partner, I love you? Neuroscientists will tell you many more times than you think. Why is it that if you say, I love you, it has to be repeated many, many times for it to be effective? While if you say, you look fat in that dress only once, or you forget an important anniversary only once, it's likely to be remembered forever. The answer lays in our brains. As with many things, from my perspective, everything can be answered by neuroscience. Let me show you a little bit of how the brain works and how you can use that knowledge to improve your own performance and the performance in teams. The people sitting in the very back, I know you have me on your screens. If you're sitting in the front and you can't see well, please come forward to the stage, just come closer, because I'm not showing any slides at all, so you will have to see what I'm doing here. If we take a look at the brain, and let's say this is the brain, seen from the side, so here you have the eyes. There's a part of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex, PFC. That's the part of the brain that you need to be successful. That's a part of your brain that does all the heavy thinking. That's where you do logical thinking, planning, decision-making, all kinds of higher-order cognitive processing. That's also the seat of delayed gratification. So rather than being at the hotel spa right now, you're sitting here listening to a heavy program. That's inhibiting your more primitive impulses. It's also the part of the brain that matures only when you're about 18 or 21. So if you had spent any significant time around teenagers, I think this explains a lot. You think they know what they're doing, but they're actually handling a lot of their impulses, not with their prefrontal cortex, but with other parts of the brain, because the prefrontal cortex needs time to grow and to develop. There was some research in the 60s that was very famous, where they gave children the opportunity to eat marshmallows in a laboratory setting. So they either gave them one marshmallow now, and you could take it and eat it, or wait for 15 minutes and then get 2 marshmallows. You can try it with your kids at home if you have somebody at around age 4 or 5 or at some different age even, and see what they do. And what they found was that the children who went for the 1 marshmallow right away were less successful later when they were grown up than the ones who were able to delay gratification and to wait for 15 minutes. So the prefrontal cortex is actually something that you can train. It would be useless to have this session here if your brain was just non-plastic and nothing could change. Your prefrontal cortex can be trained to become more efficient and to be more powerful, which I think is good news. But the bad news is that our prefrontal cortex is very, how do I say, it's very sensitive to a lot of issues and problems. It gets run over by other parts of the brain, because we have a part of the brain that's called the limbic system, and that's where our emotions are processed. It's a more primitive brain network, and when the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system get into a fight, the limbic system always wins. So we are successful because we have a prefrontal cortex that helps us to think rationally. But as soon as our emotions come in, our prefrontal cortex might not work so well anymore. So I'd like to show you a little bit more about the interaction of the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, so you know how you can create an environment for high performance in which the prefrontal cortex can function properly. In the limbic system, there are 2 basic networks, or 2 basic reactions. One is called a reward. And when people are in a reward state, a substance in the cold is released that is called dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it makes your brain more efficient. It actually helps your prefrontal cortex to perform better. It's also a substance that makes you rather happy. When you think about the reward circuit, that's activated when you anticipate that positive things are going to happen to you. So you meet a coworker you like, you're enjoying a meal you enjoy. Anything positive will trigger your reward system. The bad news is that this is the same circuit that is activated when you use drugs. I'm not implying you guys are doing a lot of drugs. All I'm saying is when you experience positive things at the workplace, you need more of that to get the same result. Because your reward system always expects more. If you get a certain bonus this year, and I think in HR you're the one very often probably involved in that process, people expect more. The same last year's bonus will not make them happy this year, even though it might be a lot of money. Many companies are paying a lot of money, making people very miserable and upset, because we always want a little bit more. You should keep that. This doesn't mean that we should create a negative work environment because people get used to the good stuff anyhow, but you should be aware of the fact that when, for example, you give a lot of positive feedback and create a happy work environment, people tend to get used to that as well. They always need a little bit more. One advice I have on this is to work with, for example, unexpected rewards. Our brain is very open to novel experiences, to being stimulated by surprise. So one thing companies can do to avoid that is by giving surprising rewards to their employees once in a while, because our brain reacts much more strongly to unexpected rewards than to things we anticipate. So, for example, you can spend less money, but making people more happy by giving more personalized, unexpected rewards that they have not been planning to get. Because novelty activates the reward center, surprise, all kinds of things you didn't expect. So that's the reward center. It's basically in a part of the brain that's called the nucleus accumbens. I'm giving this for the ones here who are interested in all the details. But there's also a second mechanism in the limbic system, and that's the threat response. That's the classical fight or flight mechanism that I think many of you have heard about. When we are in a stressful, negative situation, our brain will release cortisol, the negative stress hormone cortisol, into our system. And the problem is, while a reward comes quickly and goes quickly, and you always need more of it to have the same effect, a threat can stay forever. That's why if you say one negative thing to a person in a performance review and a lot of positive things, 1 year later they will remember the negative thing, because our brains have a built-in negativity bias. I put it here. Negativity bias. What does this mean? Our brains process negative information 9 times more strongly than positive information. So some scientist, he said, positive information is like Teflon, right? It vanishes quickly, while negative information is like Velcro. It really sticks. And I think you have all seen this. We are very, very sensitive to people who don't like us, negative feedback, all kinds of negative experiences. And the biggest negative experience people usually have at the workplace are their bosses or their coworkers or their clients. We are very sensitive to social environments with a lot of threat. And sometimes we even imagine a threat where there is none. People go into threat mode very easily. So I'd like for you to know about the negativity bias of 9-to-1. This does not mean that you have to avoid negative situations and not, to sugarcoat everything. I just think that this awareness of the negativity bias helps you to understand some of the reactions people will have to negative information or negative scenarios. They'll go into threat mode. And what you can see is that when we're in a reward state, our limbic system has a lot of connections to the prefrontal cortex. So when we're in a reward state, it makes our prefrontal cortex work better. Research shows that people who are happy at work perform better. While if you're in a threat state, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. Imagine you are in a dangerous situation. Your ancestors met a hungry lion in the forest, not a lion, a bear maybe, or something like this. I don't know what kind of dangerous animals you have in Estonia. And you don't go there once he attacked you once and check out the next time you meet him if he's friendlier this time, right? You make sure you run away or you fight. There's not so many creative solutions to negative situations. While if you're in a positive mood, you're more likely to be innovative and to come up with new ideas because your brain is just wired to think more creatively when we're in a good mood and to act very much on instinct when we're not in a good mood. So that's the basic mechanism of our brains. Our emotions influence our cognitive performance. We love to think that we are very rational creatures and that, it's all a matter of thinking right and thinking straight, but it's actually our emotions who have the biggest impact on our performance. Does everybody agree that a good mood is good for work performance? Or is somebody here who would say, I think it's sometimes good to stress people out, to set deadlines, to make them a little bit, to push the buttons? Anybody here who likes to stress out other people? Well, I think the problem with the HR community is that it's very nice people and a lot of women. When I work for leaders, whereas the room full of men, there's tons of them who raise their hands and say, I love to stress out people, I think they need a lot of pressure. And I would like to show you that both sides are correct. Some people need a lot of pressure and enjoy working on a lot of pressure, while other people actually enjoy not having so much pressure. And there's a biological basis to it, and that's what I would like to show you now. Are you following with me on that one? Is this one clear? So I move on. So, you pick out a new color. Here we have performance. By performance, I don't mean how smart you are or how well you perform at your job, but how well is your prefrontal cortex functioning this given moment, So this is about your personal potential of how well does your prefrontal cortex work at that moment. And here we have something that scientists call arousal. This is about, here you are in a coma sleep, and here you're close to a panic attack. So this is about how activated your central nervous system is at this given moment. And in between, there's lots of different stages. Now let's imagine that your boss comes and he or she gives you a very boring, irrelevant task. She says, why don't you prepare next year's HR meeting? It's, we don't have an agenda yet. We don't know who's coming yet. But why don't you go ahead and prepare it already now? A year from now it's happening. You're going to be very bored, I think, and somewhere down here and thinking that this is a waste of time and energy, because you maybe also know that she's always changing her mind, and then you do all of this preparation, and then it's going to be different anyhow. So in situations like this, our performance is going to be quite low. Also, maybe if you have to deal with kind of standard tasks that you have to do that are useful but not really exciting. So there are lots of situations in the workplace where we might be somewhere down here. People might not see that we're not performing well, but we are kind of doing this on autopilot. We're doing a little bit low effort on this thing. Then you might also have situations in which you have to prepare in front of a lot of people and make a presentation, and then 2 minutes before you're on the stage, you realize that all of your numbers are wrong. The CEO of the company is present, everybody's watching you, and you just have the wrong data, and you're afraid to be very embarrassed. Your performance is probably going to be somewhere here. You might even get a blackout. You might be sweating and in a threat state. Or the kindergarten calls you and they tell you that your child is sick and you have 100 deadlines just a day and you're rushing from one place to the other to get everything done. There are lots of situations that put people into a low performance stage. This is where you want to be. This is where highest performance happens. And when people are in a state of highest performance, they lose concept of time. They're fully present in the moment, and they're engaged in what they're doing. This stage is also called flow by scientists, or peak performance. And as you can see, there's an inverse U correlation between performance and arousal. You need a certain level of activation to get there. But when it gets too much, your performance is going to go down again. And I'd like to show you 3 magical ingredients you need to make peak performance happening. And I call this fun, fear, and focus. Okay, I put it here. Fun, fear, and focus. So this is a stage, the flow stage, in which research has shown that people are 5 times as productive as usually. So it really pays off to get into a flow stage rather regularly. And research also says that 40% of people never reach flow because they just don't. And I will give you a recipe on how to make flow happen. First of all, the fun. When people have fun at work, dopamine is released. And when people release dopamine, their prefrontal cortex work better. So if you're not having fun at work, something's wrong with you. You're not at your highest performance. Your coworkers and your boss might even tell you, good job, well done, but you're not reaching your personal top performance. Because this is an individual rating. This is not comparing you to other people. This is your individual potential of performance. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, your brain is not releasing dopamine. And without dopamine, your prefrontal cortex is not to be working at its best. So choose a job you enjoy. I'm not talking about the after-work kind of fun, of having a beer with your coworkers. I'm talking about, are your major tasks fun? Are you enjoying your job? Do you have talents in that area of your job? Very often when people have a talent, they also think it's fun. When we are not good at something, we usually don't enjoy doing these things. So you should seek a job where your talents can shine, right? And then you will have fun at work, and then your brain will release dopamine. The second ingredient is fear. I'm not speaking about a negative work environment in which you're afraid all the time and stressed out. I'm speaking about being slightly over-challenged. You need to challenge yourself. If you're always doing the same things for 10 years in a row and nothing new is happening, you're not going to be at your top performance. You might need a job rotation. You might need to take on new challenges. You need to be always a bit over-challenged. So the key is not to be optimally challenged where the skills meet the challenge. You need to be a bit over-challenged. I have a friend, she went to a Bob Dylan concert, and she was so disappointed because she expected him to play all of these famous songs that everybody knows and can sing along to. And he played completely new songs that nobody knew or cared about. Bob Dylan was very happy because I think otherwise he would have been bored to death. Artists, they need to always perform new pieces of music. Lang Lang, when he plays the piano, he's not performing the very same piece every single day when he tours around the world. You need to challenge yourself. Artists know this. Athletes know this. So you need to make sure that you always challenge yourself and expose yourself to new situations. And when you do that, your brain releases a substance called noradrenaline. And noradrenaline, I like to call it the nicer little brother of cortisol. It's also a stress hormone, but it's positive stress, right? So it's the kind of stress that makes you better at what you're doing. And you need to always raise the stakes a little bit. So if you're as an HR executive working on, people's performance, you should always think about pushing them a little bit over the edge. The third substance you need is focus. Think about Gerd Kanter, the famous Estonian discus thrower. Imagine that the moment before he has to throw, he checks his emails or he takes a call. People would get very upset, I think, if he did this. He would have his fans being very angry at him for messing up his concentration at an important game like the Olympics. He's not going to do that. Top athletes are not doing this. Lang is not pulling out his emails or taking calls while he's performing on stage. I'm not doing it here on stage, but in the business world, people act like this all the time. They multitask, they're expected to work with an open door policy where everybody's welcome at any time to interrupt you and whatever you're doing. I would invite people to plan and schedule some focus time every week. It's impossible to get into flow if you're not focusing. And research shows that when people multitask, there's a 50-50 rule. You make 50% more mistakes, and you take 50% more time. So give people a chance to focus. I know some people who started to schedule something that I like to call a meeting of one. We always prioritize meetings with other people. We put it in our calendar, we tell the assistant to block it, to not take any calls, but we need some time also to maybe sit down and to fully focus on our most important strategic decisions. And when our brain can focus and has this sustained, prolonged attention, a substance is released that is called acetylcholine. If you think about children, their acetylcholine system is on all the time. You know, kids are like sponges, always interested, always curious, always looking for things. They can get so immersed in play that it's, you know, you're calling them for dinner and nobody's listening because they're so busy playing. That's the acetylcholine, and that's what you also need at work to be productive. And I think researchers have found that our ability to focus is now shorter, our attention span is now shorter than the attention span of a goldfish. Because during the past 10 years, people have spent so much time on their smartphones and multitasking that our ability to focus is decreasing. Today's teenagers are not as much able to focus than people 20 or 30 years ago. And we should be very aware of this fact, because if you don't have focus, you don't get into flow. And that's when the magic happens. So you need the fun, you need the fear, and you need the focus. I think that's rather intuitive for all of you. But here's a little twist to it. Some people are over here. They love to do new things all the time. Maybe during the week they fly from Japan to Los Angeles, do lots of things, and the weekend they're running a marathon or do rock climbing. We have people here like Richard Branson, who founded 500 different companies so far in his life. We have people who constantly seek new challenges and they need it. Scientists call them sensation seekers or dopamine junkies, because they tend to have a mutation in the DRD4 receptor of the dopamine system, making them to need more external stimulation to get activated. You see, this person at this point is already declining in performance while this person is still raising. And there's a genetic basis to this. Some people need a lot of change, and they might need to change jobs more often. They need to change roles more often. You need to challenge them a lot all the time. They might even like to have a healthy fight once in a while with their coworkers. Okay, because this also correlates with the testosterone system in the brain. And when you have testosterone and dopamine coming together, you get people who are very much into competition and doing new things all the time. We also have people who are here. So they need a lot more structure and a more quiet environment to perform well. Where do you think we can find people like this? Do you have any idea in which professions you would find people more to the left? Scientists, excellent. Very often when I ask this, people say, oh, you know, kindergarten teachers, kind of the low performers of the organizations, the stupid ones. It's not true. It's people like Louis Pasteur, who invented germ theory. Luckily, thanks to him, we are not dying anymore in surgery because the surgeon didn't wash his hands. It's Nobel Prize-winning scientists who might focus on one molecule day after day after day after day without losing interest and going into all the details. It's also best-selling authors. The people to the right would love to have their name on a book, but they spend 2 hours starting to write it, and then they kind of find other things to do, and they think they're going to finish it, but we all know it's not going to happen. These people get it done. It's people like Maria Under, who wrote that wonderful poetry. She had to sit there and think about every single word until it became perfect. She would not just drop down a few lines and say, oh, my poetry is finished. She would probably sit there for hours and hours and hours and reread it and edit it until it was perfect. The people more to the left are the ones who will think twice before sending out that email, rather than twittering their opinion about North Korea into the world, It's also, if you had heart surgery tomorrow, would you rather take the surgeon who loves to experiment and who's a bit bored in his job and looking for new challenges? Or would you take the one who has done this specific surgery many, many times and who will do it the exact same way tomorrow without losing interest? I think we all prefer the one more to the left. Or if you think about lawyers, you want them to read the fine print on page 295 and to not miss some detail. These people are more into top-down communication. They see the big picture. They will tell you it's very often people also at the top of the organization. So they just want to hear 3 points and then they don't listen anymore. These people want to know all the details. But here's the thing. As you can see, all of these 3 picks are at the same level. So it's not about these people being the low performer and these the high performers. It's about the fact that people have different working styles. Some people reach their individual peak performance under a more quiet work environment, while others need a lot of external stimulation to reach that peak. And I think when you build a team, you need to communicate about these things. You need to understand that we all need fun, fear, and focus, but what that really means on an individual basis can be very different scenarios. I think for you guys sitting here, you probably also have a lot of people thinking about how can we get more women in leadership positions. I see that there's a lot of, this topic is very hot at the moment. And what I can say is that on average, women are more to the left. And there's a strong genetic component to this. And very often these initiatives to increase female leadership in organizations, they try to teach the women to lean in, to take charge, to be more active, to be more proactive. So they're trying to push the women more into behavior more to the right. But that takes a lot of energy because you won't change who you are, right? It's much better to change the workplace and not the women. So you need to create a workplace that accommodates all kinds of work styles where everybody can be successful, rather than tailoring the workplace just to one type of people more to the right. Because very often the people who made it to the top in an organization are very often very competitive men. At least that's what I see when I work for big organizations. It's these typical classical sensation-seeking men. There's nothing wrong with them, but what they do is that they create a work environment which is good for people similar to themselves. So everybody who's more to the left is considered a bit of a low performer, when in reality, there is no difference in performance. It's just that people reach their peak performance under different conditions. With all of that in mind, I'd like to leave you with 3 key things you can do to improve performance. You see? First of all, increase your self-awareness. You're not going to change where you are on the curve. With age, we are all going more to the left. Right? That's going to change because of decreasing testosterone and dopamine level. But don't try to change who you are. Don't try to become someone else. For women, very often, don't try to act like a man. It's going to work for 2, 3 years, maybe 5, maybe 10, but then it's exhausting. Know where you are on the curve. Know what you need. Know your strength. Know your talents. And then, what you should do then is you should change your work environment. I often have people approaching me saying, what can I do to be less stressed out? What are mental techniques for reducing stress? How can I work better, be more high performing? The first thing I check is whether this person is in an environment where she can be naturally successful. Sometimes people are just in the wrong spot. And when you're not, if you're very much to the right and you're working in an environment where everything is very structured and rigid and there's not much change, you're going to be understimulated. And if you're very much to the left and working in an environment where everybody's more to the right, you're going to be constantly stressed out and maybe even going into burnout. So first of all, check your fit with your environment and then have a conversation with the people around you on what your needs are. Very often these things can be worked out. So you can have different people in a team who work in very different ways and who still work well together. So it's all about communication and knowing what you need. Small changes can go a long way. So I don't necessarily say you have to quit your job, but you should be aware of your personal working style to know what you need to be successful. And the third thing is improve your neurochemical balance. If you think about it, all of the substances I've been speaking about today, the dopamine, the noradrenaline, the acetylcholine, they are not consisting of air, right? They are being built of proteins and amino acids in our nutrition. So if you eat well, you're allowing your brain to build these substances that you need for your peak performance. So nutrition does have an impact on cognitive performance. So eat well, sleep well. During sleep, our brain will flush out cortisol from our system, and cortisol is the negative stress hormone that impairs our performance. And during sleep, also dopamine and serotonin levels will be restored. So if you want optimal performance, you should prioritize your sleep. And last but not least, physical exercise. The best exercise you can provide for your brain is physical exercise. So if you go running or do some kind of sports, it will reduce stress level and it will reinstall serotonin and dopamine levels. And also a substance called brain-derived neurotrophic growth factor will be released, and that makes your brain more open for change and learning new things. So eat well, sleep well, and exercise, and this will improve your neurochemical balance. Thank you for listening. I'm done. And yeah.
Thank you, Friederike, for your very enlightening speech. Thank you.